Imagine the most important soldier Britain put into the field in the entire Second World War. Not the most decorated, not the most famous. The one whose single contribution to the Allied cause saved more lives, moved more German divisions, and changed more outcomes than almost any other individual action in 6 years of fighting. Now imagine that he was not a soldier, that he had never worn a uniform, never fired a weapon, never received an order or given one. That he was Welsh, homeless and dead before the war needed him. That he died in a warehouse in January of 1943 and was in the ground in Spain 4 months later under a name that was not his own. Before I tell you what he did, I want to ask you something. Put your answer in the comments. How many Allied soldiers do you think this one man saved? Because the number, when you hear it, is going to seem impossible. Stay until the end. What you are about to discover is one of the strangest and most human stories the Second World War produced. Almost no one knows his name. In May of 1943, the Allies had done something that had not been done in this war before. They had won an entire theater. 250,000 Axis troops surrendered in Tunisia, the largest mass capitulation since Stalingrad. North Africa was over, and for the first time since the fighting began, the Allied powers had cleared an enemy from the map entirely and could look at what came next. What came next was obvious. It had been obvious since before the campaign ended. Sicily sat 90 miles north of the Tunisian coast, a stepping stone so geometrically necessary that it barely required discussion. Take it, and you controlled the central Mediterranean for the first time since 1941, reopening the sea lanes that had been closed to Allied shipping for 2 years. Take it, and you could threaten the Italian mainland directly, which Churchill had been calling the soft underbelly of Europe since the previous year. Take it and you put an army on Axis home soil for the first time in the war, with all the psychological weight that carried. The case was irrefutable. The logic was airtight. The target was Sicily. The problem was that everyone knew it, not just the Allied planners sitting around tables in Algiers. Hitler knew. Mussolini knew. The German and Italian commanders in the Mediterranean had been discussing it openly since the fall of Tunisia. Churchill himself put it more plainly than anyone when the question of whether Sicily was too obvious came up in a planning meeting. Everyone but a bloody fool would know that it is Sicily. He meant it as an acknowledgement that the choice was both necessary and dangerous. An enemy who had already decided where the blow was coming had 3 months to prepare a defense that would be waiting on the beaches when 180,000 Allied soldiers arrived. The original casualty projections for a Sicily invasion against fully reinforced German defenses were not comfortable reading. 10,000 killed and wounded in the first week alone. Against a properly prepared opposition on difficult terrain, the campaign could last 90 days. Each of those days had its own arithmetic of loss. Allied strategic planners understood what this meant. If the target could not be changed, and it could not, the logic was too compelling, then what the enemy believed about the target had to be. This was the problem that demanded a solution. That solution had a name. Operation Barclay, a broad deception campaign across the Mediterranean intended to persuade the Axis that the Allies were planning something other than Sicily. Barclay had many components. Most were conventional. One had been written down 4 years earlier, on a list, by a man who was not yet famous, under a heading that described it as a suggestion that was not a very nice one. In September of 1939, weeks after Britain declared war on Germany, an officer in British naval intelligence sat down and wrote a memorandum. It was issued under the name of his superior, Rear Admiral John Godfrey, the Director of Naval Intelligence. Its actual author, according to the historian Ben McIntyre, bore the unmistakable hallmarks of Godfrey's personal assistant, a lieutenant commander, whose name meant nothing outside the corridors of the Admiralty and who had not yet written a single novel. His name was Ian Fleming. The document was called the Trout Memo because it compared the business of deceiving an enemy in wartime to fly fishing. The trout fisher casts patiently all day, it read. He frequently changes his venue and his lures. If he is frightened of fish, he may give the water a rest for half an hour, but his main endeavor, to attract fish by something he sends out from his boat, is incessant. The memo listed 54 ways that the enemy, like a trout, might be lured towards something that would destroy him. Some were cunning, some were fanciful. Some required resources the Navy did not yet have. Number 28 was different. It was short. It was labeled, in the voice of a man who understood exactly what he was proposing, as a suggestion, not a very nice one. The idea was taken from a 1937 crime novel by Basil Thomson, a former intelligence officer who had interrogated Mata Hari during the previous war and then turned to writing detective fiction. In Thompson's novel, a corpse carrying forged documents had been planted to confuse investigators about a murder. Fleming recognized the same mechanism working in the opposite direction. A corpse dressed as an airman with dispatches in his pockets could be dropped on the coast, supposedly from a parachute that had failed. The enemy, finding a dead officer with what appeared to be classified material, would act on what the documents contained. Fleming did not pursue it. He filed it. The Trout Memo went into the archives. 3 years passed. The war moved through the fall of France, through the siege of Malta, through El Alamein and Torch and Tunisia. And in October of 1942, a flight lieutenant in the Royal Air Force, who had been seconded to MY5, came across item 28 on the list and decided it was time. His name was Charles Cholmondeley, and the name is pronounced Chumley, which is important to establish immediately because the gap between the spelling and the sound is itself a small portrait of the man. He was born in South Australia in 1917. He had joined the RAF, despite having eyesight too poor to fly. He had been assigned to MI5 as an Air Force liaison officer and had become secretary of the 20 Committee, the small interdepartmental body that oversaw the running of British double agents, its name a visual pun on the phrase double cross. He was not glamorous. He was not celebrated. He was an RAF man who had never flown a plane, working for an intelligence committee most people in the British military had never heard of. What he had, as it turned out, was what McIntyre would later call a corkscrew mind. He had also discovered a new species of shrew as a schoolboy, which is neither here nor there, and yet somehow entirely characteristic. His proposal went to the 20 Committee in November of 1942. Obtain a body from a London hospital, fill the lungs with water to simulate drowning, place documents in an inside pocket, drop it from a coastal command aircraft into the sea, where the enemy would find what appeared to be the victim of a downed plane, carrying what appeared to be classified operational papers. The committee rejected the plan as unworkable. But its chairman, John Masterman, saw something in the idea that the vote had not extinguished. He assigned the committee's naval representative to work with Cholmondeley and develop it into something viable. The naval representative was Ewan Montague. Montague was not the kind of figure British naval intelligence typically produced. He was the second son of Baron Swaithling, born into one of the great Anglo-Jewish banking families of England, educated at Westminster School before going to Trinity College, Cambridge, and then Harvard. He had been a rising star of the English bar before the war, a barrister who understood with forensic precision what made a story believable under cross-examination. He was not a soldier by training. He was not a career intelligence officer. He was a lawyer whose particular skills, the patience for detail, the instinct for authenticity, the habit of imagining exactly how a jury would receive each piece of evidence, turned out to be exactly what the operation required. What Montague and Cholmondeley did next was not primarily a military operation. It was an act of sustained fiction. They needed not a body, but a person, not a corpse, but a life, a human being so completely realized in every particular, every document, every item of pocket detritus, every implied relationship and backstory, that German intelligence officers who had spent their careers detecting precisely this kind of deception would not question him for a moment. The name they chose was Captain, Acting Major, William Martin, Royal Marines, assigned to Combined Operations Headquarters. Every element was deliberate. Royal Marines meant all official inquiries about Martin's death would be routed through the Admiralty, which Montague controlled. Combined Operations provided a plausible reason for carrying sensitive documents between theaters. Acting Major placed him at exactly the right rank, high enough to be trusted with classified material, low enough that no German intelligence officer should expect to recognize the name. Finding the body proved considerably more difficult than Fleming had suggested in 1939. The requirements were exacting. A young man recently deceased, with no family to ask questions, and no cause of death that a Spanish pathologist examining a supposed drowning victim might detect. The search went on for weeks. On the 28th of January of 1943, London coroner Bentley Purchase called Ewan Montague with news. The man Purchase had found was born on the 4th of January of 1909 in a coal mining village in South Wales called Aberbargod. His name was Glyndwr Michael. He had worked as a gardener and laborer when work was available. He was semi-literate. He was 34 years old. His father Thomas, a coal miner, had committed suicide when Glyndwr was 15 years old. He had a mother. She died when he was 31. After that, nothing. No family, no connections, no fixed address. He had drifted to London, and he had lived on the streets. He was found unconscious in an abandoned warehouse near King's Cross, having ingested rat poison containing phosphorus. The particular poison came in a paste, smeared on bread crusts to attract rats. Whether he had eaten the bread because he wanted to die, or because he was hungry enough that the alternative did not register, was a question nobody who found him could answer. He was taken to St. Pancras Hospital. 2 days later, he was dead. His death certificate stated the cause as phosphorus poisoning, took rat poison, bid to kill himself while of unsound mind. He was 34 years old. He had died with no one beside him. Bentley Purchase broke the law to give the body to MI5. He falsely certified that Michael had died of pneumonia and been buried abroad, then transferred the corpse to British intelligence. He informed Montague that the small amount of phosphorus in the system would not be detected in a body that had supposedly been floating in the sea for several days. When Montague noted that the undernourished corpse did not look like a field officer, Purchase replied that he does not have to look like an officer, only a staff officer, more accustomed to a desk than a rifle. The body was stored at 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to prevent decomposition, not so cold as to freeze the flesh. Purchas warned Montague that after 3 months the body would have deteriorated past the point of usefulness. The clock started on the 28th of January. Before describing what was built from those 90 days, something must be said plainly about what was done to Glyndwr Michael. He could not be asked. He was dead. His parents were also dead. The official record shows no family was found and no consent was obtained. The legal mechanism Purchas used to release the body involved deliberate falsification. The British government acknowledged this when the truth was finally extracted from classified files in 1996. McIntyre's summary requires no softening. Basically, they just lifted the body. They believed nobody would claim it. They just thought they could get away with stealing it. Hold that fact alongside everything that follows. What Montague and Cholmondeley built from their 90 days was extraordinary in its patience and its detail. The identity card required a photograph, and attempts to photograph the corpse produced images that looked unmistakably like photographs of a dead man. They found an MI5 officer named Ronnie Reed, who resembled Michael closely enough to pass. Reed was photographed in Royal Marine uniform. Montague then carried the card in his own pocket for weeks until it had the softened, worn look of a document a living man handled daily. He assigned Martin a birth date, the 29th of March, 1907. It was Montague's own birthday. McIntyre found this in the archives and noted it without excessive comment. It does not require excessive comment. The fiancée they invented was named Pam. Her face in the wallet photograph belonged to Jean Leslie, an 18-year-old MI5 clerk selected through what was essentially an office competition. Her photograph judged the most convincing image of a military officer's beloved. 2 love letters were written in Pam's voice by Leslie's supervisor, Hester Leggett, and placed in the wallet alongside the photograph. A receipt from a Bond Street jeweler recorded the purchase of a diamond engagement ring at £53, 10 shillings and 6 pence. A letter from Lloyd's Bank demanded repayment of an overdraft of £79, 19 shillings and 2 pence. A letter from the fictitious Martin's father, pompous and pedantic as only an Edwardian father could be in McIntyre's precise description, established a family connection of entirely recognizable stiffness. Theater ticket stubs from the 22nd of April placed Martin in London on a specific dateable evening. A bill from the Naval and Military Club accounted for 4 nights between the 18th and 24th of April. A St. Christopher's medal and a silver cross established his Catholicism. Cigarettes, matches, a pencil stub, keys, a book of stamps, an invitation to the Cabaret Club, a receipt from the tailor Jeeves for a new shirt. Each item was manufactured or selected to contribute to a coherent, internally consistent life. The accumulation of mundane detail was the point. No German intelligence officer would expect a planted body to carry a bank overdraft letter alongside a tailor's receipt and a love letter about an engagement ring. Real people had overdrafts. Real people received stern notes from their fathers about nothing in particular. Real people were in debt, going to the theater, buying new shirts, falling in love. Major William Martin was becoming, through the obsessive attention of Montague and Cholmondeley, real. The documents in the briefcase were a different matter. They were the operation's reason for existing, and they had to be exceptional. The main document was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, To General Sir Harold Alexander, the British commander in North Africa. It opened, "My dear Alex." After weeks of drafts that Montagu kept trying to improve with small jokes the chiefs of staff kept removing, the decision was made to have Nye write the letter himself in his own voice. What Nye produced, Montagu later wrote, was ideally suited to the purpose. The letter covered authentic military trivia, a new Guards Brigade commander, the matter of American Purple Heart medals being offered to British servicemen, to establish the texture of genuine correspondence between senior officers. The strategic deception lay within these unremarkable matters. The letter indicated that the principal Allied invasion target was Greece, with Major Martin carrying relevant planning material for it. Sicily was described as a feint, and Nye added one sentence that was, in its construction, a small masterpiece of layered meaning. "We stand a very good chance of making the Boche think we will go for Sicily. It is an obvious objective and one about which he must be nervous." This was the double bluff. By acknowledging Sicily's obviousness in a document describing a secret plan to attack Greece, Nye had created a letter that both planted false information and appeared to explain why any intelligence suggesting a Sicily landing should be treated as Allied misdirection. A German analyst reading it would find, built into the document itself, the reason to dismiss the truth. A second letter from Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten to the Mediterranean Fleet's commander introduced Martin as an expert in amphibious landings and contained what Montagu privately considered a risky sardine joke, implying a Sardinia invasion. Mountbatten was a member of the royal family, Montagu noted with some anxiety, and hardly constrained by rationing. If anyone could obtain sardines whenever he wanted them, it was surely Lord Louis. The reference looked dangerously like an artificial insertion of the word sardines into a high-level military communication. It was included nonetheless. Before the envelopes were sealed, Montagu pressed a single eyelash against the inside of one of them, a tamper indicator of the most primitive possible kind, costing nothing, designed to reveal if the letter had been opened and resealed. It would later prove decisive. In the early hours of the 17th of April, 1943, Montagu, Cholmondeley, and Purchase dressed the body of Glyndwr Michael in Royal Marine battle dress. There was an immediate problem. The feet had frozen during storage, and the boots would not go on. An electric heater was located. The feet were thawed. The boots went on. The pocket litter was distributed. The briefcase, containing the Nye letter, the Mountbatten letter, and a third document, included in Montagu's own words, literally to make weight, was attached to the body with a leather-covered chain looped through the belt. The body was placed in a sealed metal canister, packed with 9.5 kilograms of dry ice, which would sublimate to carbon dioxide, expel the oxygen, and preserve the corpse without refrigeration. The canister was loaded into a 1937 Fordson van. The driver was Jock Horsfall. In civilian life, he had been one of England's leading racing drivers. He drove through the night. Montagu and Cholmondeley rode in the back of the van, in the dark, from London to Greenock on the west coast of Scotland, where the Royal Navy submarine HMS Seraph was waiting. The crew were told the canister contained a secret meteorological device. Only the officers were told the truth. On the 19th of April, HMS Seraph sailed south. The destination had been selected on the advice of the British naval attaché in Madrid. Huelva, a fishing town in the southwest of Spain, had a particular advantage. A known agent of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, was resident there under cover as an agricultural technician. His name was Adolf Klaus. He had strong connections with the local Spanish naval authorities, who were themselves strongly pro-German. If a British officer washed ashore near Huelva with a briefcase of apparently classified documents, Klaus would hear within hours. The British had also calculated that the local Spanish naval officers and their German contacts would not honor Spain's official obligation to return personal effects to the relevant consular authorities. They would open the documents, photograph them, reseal them with enough care that no visible evidence of tampering remained, and return the briefcase looking untouched. The operation required the enemy to misbehave in precisely the right way. At 4:30 on the morning of the 30th of April, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced approximately 1 mile off the Huelva coast. The crew were sent below. The officers raised the body from the canister. Lieutenant Bill Jewell, the submarine's commander, gathered the officers on deck. He read the 39th Psalm. The psalm speaks of the transience of human life, man like a passing shadow, his days numbered and brief. It had been written for the dead of every era. On a submarine in the Atlantic before dawn, it was read over a Welsh laborer who had died in a warehouse 3 months earlier and had never known a war was being fought around him. The body, in its Royal Marine battle dress with a Mae West life jacket and the briefcase chained to its wrist, was lowered into the water. Jewell revved the engines to push it toward shore. The signal reached London at 7:30 that morning, mincemeat complete. The officers then attempted to sink the canister. Small arms fire did not sink it. Cannon fire did not sink it. A small explosive charge was used. The explosion went unheard by civilians on shore. At approximately 9:30 that same morning, a sardine fisherman working the coastal waters near Huelva found the body of a British officer floating in the sea and pulled it aboard. He reported it to the local authorities. Francis Haselden, the British vice consul in Huelva, was officially notified of the discovery. His instructions were specific. Send urgent diplomatic cables demanding the immediate return of sensitive documents. Transmitted in a code the British had confirmed the Germans had broken earlier in the war. The cables were designed to be intercepted. Watching Britain scramble to recover a briefcase would confirm, for any German intelligence officer reading the traffic, that the documents inside were genuine secrets. The autopsy was conducted on the 1st of May, with Haselden present. The mincemeat team had hoped for an inexperienced provincial coroner who would perform a cursory examination. They received a specialist from the University of Madrid, whose professional expertise was the investigation of drownings. Haselden pressed the doctor to conclude quickly, citing the heat and the condition of the body. The doctor recorded drowning and hypothermia. He did not find phosphorus. The first crisis of the operation passed without consequence. On the 2nd of May, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines was buried with full military honors in the Nuestra Señora de la Soledad Cemetery in Huelva. He received the ceremony appropriate to his rank. The man who had received no ceremony at all when he died in January was given, in his borrowed name, a burial that Glyndwr Michael never had. For 9 days after the burial, the Spanish Navy retained the briefcase. The diplomatic cable traffic continued. Germany's intelligence network pressed through its Spanish contacts. The documents were removed from their envelopes using thin steel rods inserted without breaking the seal, photographed, and replaced with extraordinary care. Not a visible mark of tampering was left. On the 11th of May, the briefcase was returned to Haselden and shipped to London by diplomatic bag. Montague examined the contents within hours of its arrival. He looked at the envelope containing the eyelash. The eyelash was gone. The letters had been read. Confirmation arrived 3 days later. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park, working the German Enigma traffic, decrypted a communication sent on the 12th of May. It warned the German High Command that the Allied invasion would target the Balkans, with a feint toward the Dodecanese Islands. The message confirmed the documents had traveled all the way to the top of the German command structure. A telegram was sent to Winston Churchill, then in Washington. It read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line, and sinker by the right people, and from the best information, they look like acting on it." On the 14th of May, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz met Hitler to discuss the Mediterranean situation. Dönitz recorded what the Führer said. The Führer does not agree with Mussolini that the most likely invasion point is Sicily. Furthermore, he believes that the discovered Anglo-Saxon order confirms the assumption that the planned attacks will be directed mainly against Sardinia and the Peloponnesus. Hitler then issued orders. The highly experienced 1st Panzer Division was transferred from France to Salonika in Greece. 7 Italian infantry divisions were moved from Italy to Greek positions. 10 additional divisions went to the Balkans. Sardinia's garrison was doubled to 10,000 men, with fighter aircraft moved there as support. Torpedo boats transferred from Sicilian to Greek waters. 2 panzer divisions were pulled from the Eastern Front, weakening the forces opposing the Soviet army at a moment of acute pressure there, and sent west to meet an anticipated Balkan invasion. The entire weight of German strategic deployment in the Mediterranean shifted, within days, from the island that was the actual target to regions that existed in the Allied plan only as fiction. Every division sent to Greece was a division absent from Sicily. Every tank in Sardinia was a tank not positioned on a Sicilian road. Every torpedo boat in the Aegean was a torpedo boat not patrolling the Strait of Sicily. The mathematics were not complicated. They were simply vast. On the night of the 9th of July, 1943, 180,000 Allied soldiers sailed for Sicily aboard 3,000 ships, covered by 4,000 aircraft. The original plan had allowed 90 days against a heavily reinforced defense and projected 10,000 killed and wounded in the first week alone. The weather that night was catastrophic. Gale-force winds and driving rain scattered the airborne elements across the island and the sea. The glider operation suffered terribly. Only 4 of the 144 gliders carrying Commonwealth troops reached their objectives. The rest were smashed into cliffs or forced down into the ocean. More than 600 Commonwealth soldiers drowned before a shot was fired by any enemy, and they have no known grave but the Mediterranean. The night was the worst imaginable for an amphibious assault. It was also, for that reason, the last night on which Axis commanders expected one to come. The defenders of Sicily had stood down. 2 German divisions waited on the island. 2 against 180,000. The rest were in Greece and Sardinia and the Balkans, waiting for an operation that did not exist. 4 hours after the landings began, 21 German aircraft left Sicily and flew for Sardinia. They had been ordered to intercept Allied forces there. The Allied forces there did not exist. The planes flew over an empty sea and returned. They were still acting on the documents from Huelva while Allied soldiers were fighting and dying on Sicilian beaches. The deception had not merely shaped the defenders' dispositions before the invasion, it was operating concurrently with it. Hitler's conviction held past the point where evidence should have dislodged it. Even as Sicily fell week by week, he continued to insist the real blow was coming in the Balkans. In late July, he sent Erwin Rommel to Salonika to prepare a defense of a region the Allies had no intention of entering. The letters Montagu had built from a Bond Street receipt and an Edwardian father's note had colonized the strategic imagination of the German High Command. The island fell in 38 days. The planners had allowed 90. Allied casualties were approximately 6,000 killed and 24,850 total. Against the projection of 10,000 in the first week, these figures speak plainly. The lives they represent were not saved by terrain or luck alone, though the campaign had both. They were saved to a degree that cannot be precisely measured, but cannot be seriously doubted, by a dead man pushed into the Atlantic off a submarine and carried by the current to a Spanish fishing coast. On the 25th of July, as the battle for Sicily turned irreversibly against the Axis, the Italian Grand Council of Fascism voted to limit Mussolini's powers. The following day, King Victor Emmanuel III summoned Mussolini to an audience and had him arrested at the door. The first fascist government in the history of the world fell. Italy entered secret negotiations with the Allies. In September, Italy surrendered. Germany was forced to occupy its former ally with its own troops, diverting 1/5 of the entire Wehrmacht from the Eastern Front to backfill positions across the Italian peninsula and the Balkans. The Mediterranean reopened to Allied shipping for the first time since 1941. The military historian Sir Michael Howard, writing in the official history of British intelligence in the Second World War, called Operation Mincemeat the best known, and perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. Montagu knew it had worked from the moment the telegram reached Washington. He also knew the full account of how it had worked, and through whom could not yet be told. Bletchley Park's role in confirming the operation's success was among the most sensitive secrets of the entire war. The identity of the man in the Huelva grave was to remain undisclosed indefinitely. The first threat to this silence came from an unexpected direction. In 1950, Duff Cooper, a former cabinet minister who had been briefed on the operation in March of 1943, published a novel called Operation Heartbreak. It used the corpse deception plot with only the thinnest fictional disguise. The German and Spanish participants in the original events began talking. The British press started asking questions. The security services faced a choice between continued silence, which would only deepen speculation, and controlled disclosure. They chose disclosure. Montagu was told he could tell the story. He was also told precisely what he could not say. He wrote The Man Who Never Was over a single weekend. Published in 1953, it sold 2 million copies. A film followed in 1956, with Clifton Webb as Montagu. The real Montagu appeared in the film in a small cameo, playing an admiral who argues against the plan, and found himself on screen in dispute with a fictional version of his younger self. What the book suppressed was significant. Bletchley's role was not mentioned. The organized nature of British strategic deception was presented as improvised adventure. The cause of the corpse's death was attributed to pneumonia, with a false claim that the family had given consent. The man's name remained withheld. He lay in Huelva under a false name and a false father, the gravestone carrying its Latin inscription, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and fitting to die for your country. Montagu died on the 19th of July, 1985. He had been asked many times across the decades about the identity of the body. He had declined to answer every time. When he died, he took the secret with him. Roger Morgan was an amateur historian from London with no professional obligation to leave questions unanswered. In 1996, as previously classified documents became available at the Public Record Office, he found what Montagu had carried to his grave. A document with a name on it. The name was Glyndwr Michael, the laborer from Aberbargod. The man found in a warehouse, 2 days dying, in January of 1943. In 1997, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission added 8 words to the gravestone in Welsh. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M. 8 words, 53 years after his burial. The question of whether that grave actually contains Glyndwr Michael has not been settled. In 2004, the authors John and Noreen Steele published a book arguing that the body was not Michael's at all, but that of a sailor named John Melville, one of 379 men drowned when the escort carrier HMS Dasher exploded in the Firth of Clyde on the 27th of March, 1943. Their argument carries a particular force. By the 30th of April, when the body went into the water off Welsh, Michael had been dead for 3 months. A naval casualty from a ship sunk 4 weeks earlier would present far more convincingly as a recent drowning victim to any examining pathologist. Bill Jewell, the Seraph's own commander, stated in retirement that he did not believe the body he had committed to the sea was Michael's. The official position of the Royal Navy and the Ministry of Defense, stated in response to a Freedom of Information request in 2010, is that the body was Glyndwr Michael, as recorded in the operation's official files at the National Archives. The debate cannot be resolved without exhumation and DNA testing. Neither has been requested. What is not in dispute is this: whoever is in that grave had no say in the use that was made of his body. The operation required a human being. The human being was taken, not recruited, not asked, taken. The record was falsified, and the operation helped to save tens of thousands of lives. That sentence does not resolve into comfort. It is not meant to. Ewan Montagu wrote, late in his life, of the particular satisfaction he had taken in what he had accomplished. He had been raised in an Anglo-Jewish family, in a country that had not always been generous to Anglo-Jewish families. He had watched from London as the regime they were fighting turned the extermination of people like him into state policy. Joy of joys to anyone, and particularly a Jew, the satisfaction of knowing that they had directly and specifically fooled that monster. He was right to feel it. The monster had been fooled. The operation had worked. What Montagu did not dwell on in any of his writings was who it had worked because of. The grave in Welsh looks down over the port and the shoreline where a fisherman pulled a dead man from the water in April of 1943. The Latin is still on the stone. It is sweet and fitting to die for your country. MacIntyre noted with the even-handedness that the story required, Glyndwr Michael had indeed given his life for his country. He had been given no choice about it. On the war memorial in Aberbargod, the Welsh mining village where he was born, his name is inscribed below a phrase in his own language. Idyn na fu erioed. The man who never was. He was. He had always been. Britain just needed 50 years and an amateur historian with a Public Record Office pass to acknowledge it. Now you know who he was. Tell someone who does not know his name.